Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. Out here on the ranch, silence reigns until Karen Strong from Saddle Ridge storms in, clipboard in hand, HOA letters fluttering like battle flags. Her mission? Bend my land to her will, but she didn't count on Brewster the Bull, a GoPro, and one stubborn rancher who'd had enough. There's something sacred about silence on a ranch. No car alarms, no HOA lawnmower patrols, no whining about mailbox paint codes. Just wind, hooves, and the occasional snort from my bull Brewster when he disapproves of my playlist. 3 years ago, I bought this spread of land, 90 acres of high desert tucked against red rock ridges in northern Arizona. Horses on one side, bison on the other, my workshop right in the middle. It was heaven. It was until a certain HOA president from the Saddle Ridge development started sniffing around like she owned the damn county. The letter came first. Cream-colored envelope, Saddle Ridge HOA, embossed like it was the Vatican. I almost laughed. I wasn't part of their subdivision. My land sat on its own parcel, registered decades before their cookie-cutter boxes popped up across the ridge. But curiosity got the better of me. I opened it. "Dear Mr. Carroll," it began, already presumptuous. "Due to your property's proximity to Saddle Ridge, we strongly encourage you to register your estate under our HOA jurisdiction to ensure uniform aesthetics, protect neighborhood value, and support community integrity." Community integrity. That's rich coming from people who think cactuses are a landscaping violation. I figured I'd shut this down the polite way. I drove into their little community center, stucco palace with a fake fountain and golf carts parked like parade floats. Inside was cool air and colder stairs. The receptionist looked up like I'd tracked manure onto her marble floor. "I'm here to speak with the HOA president," I said. "Do you have an appointment?" "Nope, but I have your letter," I said, holding it up. A few minutes later, in marched Karen Strong, tall, Botoxed, manicured like she did gardening in silk gloves. She walked like she'd never stepped on dirt voluntarily. Her blazer was beige. Her eyes were weapons-grade judgment. "You must be Mr. Carroll," she said, flashing the kind of smile you'd reserve for a raccoon in your trash cans. "Call me Jason," I replied. She launched into some speech about Saddle Ridge's vision, property values, sightline consistency. My barn, apparently, interrupts the architectural harmony of the neighborhood. I told her my barn was here before their street even existed. Hell, my land predates their developer's birth certificate. Karen pulled out a laminated map like she was unveiling a war plan. "We believe integration is in everyone's best interest. Saddle Ridge seeks a cohesive perimeter." "Cohesive perimeter?" I raised an eyebrow. "Lady, this isn't a military base. It's a ranch. My ranch." She pressed her lips into a line. "We're offering you a chance to align with the community." "Karen," I said evenly, "I don't want to align with anyone. I have livestock. I store tractors outside. I wear boots older than your HOA. I'm not joining your club." "You'll reconsider," she said. "No," I replied. "I really won't." When she realized she wasn't going to strong-arm me into surrender, her voice tightened. "I hope this doesn't become adversarial, Mr. Carroll." "Then stop acting like I'm your subordinate," I said. She sniffed, adjusted her lapel like she was preparing for court, and turned on her heel. As she walked out, she muttered something about setting a precedent. I didn't like the sound of that, but I wasn't worried. Yet. I was halfway through fixing the west paddock gate when I saw them. 2 guys in neon orange vests, clipboards in hand, snapping photos of my equipment shed like they were on safari. They were standing just outside the fence line, but inching forward like a couple of possums testing a trash can lid. "Can I help you?" I called out, letting the gate clang shut behind me. They didn't flinch, didn't introduce themselves. One of them, short, bald, looked like he'd never lifted anything heavier than a soy latte, squinted at me over his glasses. "We're conducting a visual inspection," he said. "For what exactly?" I asked, walking toward them. Brewster snorted behind me, as if offended by their presence. "We're contracted by the Saddle Ridge HOA to assess adjacent property impact on the community's visual harmony," he said, reading from his clipboard like it was scripture. "You're on private land," I said, pointing to the "No Trespassing" sign hanging right above their heads. "You're not adjacent. You're here, and you've got about 5 seconds to step off it." The taller one, who looked like he was regretting his career choice, stammered something about just doing their job. I told them they could do it from the other side of the fence. With binoculars. They shuffled back without another word. I wasn't angry yet. Not really. More annoyed, like finding out your dog sitter rearranged your garage. I figured that was the end of it, until the envelope came the next morning. Same embossed insignia. Same HOA nonsense. Only this time it wasn't an invitation. It was a violation notice. Apparently, I was being fined. Yes, fined for the following atrocities: visible machinery in sight of Saddle Ridge homeowners, improper storage of agricultural equipment, non-compliance with Saddle Ridge community appearance standards. I actually laughed when I read that last one. They attached blurry, zoomed-in pictures of my tractor, my hay elevator, even the busted wheelbarrow I hadn't gotten around to fixing yet. It read like an indictment for the crime of ranching within view of HOA royalty. And the best part, the letter included a threat of daily fines, $1,000 per day, if I didn't bring the property into compliance. I didn't respond. Not to the letter, not to the email that followed, and definitely not to the voicemail left by someone calling herself the Community Standards Officer. I had better things to do, like wrangle a bison calf that thought my water trough was a swimming pool. But I did install new cameras that weekend. Motion activated, high resolution, one pointed at the main gate, one on the shed, and another aimed directly at the paddock where the HOA boys had been snooping. And, for good measure, I added a new sign: Private Ranch, not subject to HO. Trespassers will be filmed and fed to the bull. Figured if that didn't send a message, nothing would. I should have known Karen wasn't the type to take subtle hints. Or any hints, really. Tuesday morning started like any other. Sun rising over the red ridge, coffee in one hand, feed bucket in the other. The horses were already up, impatient as hell, and Brewster was making that low grumble he reserves for mornings when I'm 5 minutes late. I was halfway to the barn when I caught something unusual on the corner of the security feed. Motion at the south fence. Not wildlife. 2 legs. Human. I set the bucket down, zoomed in on the feed, and there she was. Karen Strong, in her full suburban battle gear, cream blazer, wedge heels, phone in one hand, clipboard in the other, trudging through my pasture like she was out for a target run. The woman had climbed over the livestock gate. Unbelievable. I grabbed my GoPro, clipped it to my vest, and started walking down toward her. The moment she spotted me, she raised her phone like a shield and started recording. Because, of course she did. "You are trespassing," I called out. "This is private land. You climbed over a locked gate, Karen." She didn't even blink. "I'm conducting a regulatory survey. You've received multiple notices." "I've received garbage," I said, "none of which has any legal weight. You know that." "I have the authority to inspect adjacent impact structures," she snapped. "This barn," she pointed at my equipment shed, "is violating the Saddle Ridge Perimeter Code." "Karen," I said, keeping my tone flat, "this isn't your perimeter. It never has been. You're on my property, filming my buildings, and scaring my animals. Leave. Now." That's when she really lost it. "I don't have to leave," she shouted. "I have a mandate. This is community stewardship. I'm ensuring compliance." "Lady," I said, pulling out my phone, "the only thing you're ensuring is that the sheriff's department adds another file to your name." I hit the dial. Apparently, that spooked her, but not in the way I expected. Instead of backing off, Karen turned away from me, stepped 5 paces toward the fence, and called 911 herself. "I'm being threatened," she screamed into the phone. "He's angry. He's armed. He locked me in here." I let out a full-body exhale. She was lying, right in front of me, knowing I was recording the entire thing. GoPro was blinking red, audio crisp, video clear. Brewster even mooed in disbelief. "Yeah, keep going," I told her, deadpan. "This is going to look real good in court." She glanced over, saw the camera strapped to my vest, and turned her back. "I don't feel safe," she continued to the dispatcher. "I'm trapped on his property, and he's armed. He has weapons. Please send someone now." By the time the deputies arrived, about 12 minutes later, I was sitting on the fence rail, sipping water and reviewing the footage like a director on set. Karen was pacing, muttering about regulatory overreach and non-cooperative landholders. 2 patrol cars pulled up just outside the gate. The deputies got out, both of them young, sharp, and clearly aware this wasn't their average Tuesday. I greeted them calmly, handed them a folder with my land deed, footage printouts, and pointed to the active camera that had caught the entire scene. Karen launched into her performance immediately. "He was threatening, aggressive. He locked the gate and told me I couldn't leave. He has guns." The taller deputy looked at me. "Sir, are you armed?" "Nope," I said. "Haven't been all morning. Got the footage to prove it. And if you want the 911 call she made, you'll hear her lying straight through her teeth." We played back the camera footage right there on my tablet. Clear view, Karen scaling the gate, stomping through the property, filming everything like she was making a real estate documentary. My tone throughout, calm, firm, lawful. Karen's story unraveled in about 30 seconds. The deputy turned to her. "Ma'am, you're not only trespassing, but you made a false emergency report. That's a serious charge." She froze, mouth twitching, probably waiting for someone to cue dramatic music. "I felt endangered," she said, "but it was weaker this time. You felt endangered by a man standing 20 feet away from you with a GoPro and a water bottle." The other deputy asked. She didn't answer. They gave her a formal warning and walked her back to the fence. One of them even offered to help her over it. She declined, red-faced, and muttered something about filing a grievance with the sheriff's office. I didn't say anything else. I just watched her walk off in those heels, one snapping loudly on a rock. I didn't know it yet, but that was only the first act. I figured after the 911 stunt, Karen would crawl back into her HOA castle and maybe stick to terrorizing flower beds and kids' lemonade stands. I was wrong. The woman had more levels of escalation than a hostage negotiator with a personal grudge. About a week after the police escorted her off my property, I got served. Yep, a nice, official-looking envelope delivered by a man who looked both sympathetic and mildly amused. Inside, a civil complaint filed by the Saddle Ridge Homeowners Association. I read the first page standing barefoot on my porch, still holding my coffee. My dog Tank watched me, ears up like he expected me to throw the paper for fetch. The complaint alleged that my property posed aesthetic, environmental, and safety risks to adjacent HOA members. They claimed the visual presence of my ranch equipment, unapproved structures, and free-roaming livestock created ongoing distress to residents. Apparently, the smell of hay and the sight of actual dirt was damaging their quality of life. And then came the kicker. They were requesting a court order to forcibly integrate my land into the Saddle Ridge HOA. No joke. According to the complaint, because my land bordered their community and because it affected the uniform presentation of the area, they wanted legal authority to bring it under their jurisdiction, retroactively. I laughed so hard I choked on my coffee. They also wanted me to remove my barn due to inconsistent architectural elements, enclose all agricultural equipment in opaque HOA-compliant structures, relocate livestock beyond Saddle Ridge sightlines, pay $20,000 in or damages related to devaluation and community distress. It was insane, but it was also real. HOA lunacy backed by actual legal paperwork. I called my attorney that afternoon, Mason Dolan. We'd met a few years back when he helped me sort out some zoning nonsense with the county. Guy's a pit bull in flannel. He showed up the next morning with a briefcase full of legal texts and a travel mug that said, "You can't fix stupid, but you can litigate it." We sat in my kitchen while I read the complaint out loud. Mason didn't say much at first, just took notes and chewed on a toothpick like it was a cross-examination. Finally, he leaned back and said, "Well, they're nuts, but we're going to kill this thing dead." He got to work fast. First thing he did was pull all the property archives, old plat maps, deeds, zoning histories, everything going back to the 70s. He wanted to nail down beyond question that my land was a standalone, independently zoned agricultural parcel with zero connection to Saddle Ridge or any HOA anywhere. Second thing, he called the court and filed a preliminary response denying every single claim and flagging the case as malicious legal overreach. Then he gave me homework. Dig up every photo, document, or communication I had that proved Karen's campaign of harassment. Letters, emails, camera footage, even the HOA's website screenshots showing their boundary map, which, by the way, didn't include my land. Surprise. That night, I sat in my office going through folders while Brewster snored outside the window. I found the first violation letter, the inspection photos, Karen's LinkedIn profile where she described herself as a community compliance visionary, and even a post from the Saddle Ridge Facebook group warning neighbors about a rogue landowner with questionable livestock ethics. By the end of the night, I had a full evidence pack, ready to make the HOA's little legal dream turn into a courtroom nightmare. Mason called it the stupidest land grab attempt I've ever seen. I called it Tuesday. If Mason was a pit bull, then the county records office was his dog park. The man tore through archives like he was hunting treasure, and in a way, he was. By the end of the week, he'd unearthed more historical paperwork than a museum archivist on a bender. Turns out, my land had been officially registered as agricultural use property since 1978, long before Saddle Ridge was even a twinkle in some developer's spreadsheet. Mason had the zoning maps, plat records, and a glorious old survey that clearly showed my land as a completely separate parcel, not subject to any residential jurisdiction, no common development agreements, no community covenants, nothing. And to put the cherry on top, Saddle Ridge's own HOA charter explicitly stated that no external properties could be integrated without the owner's consent, which I'd already refused, loudly, multiple times, on camera. Still, Mason didn't stop there. "These people don't operate on logic," he said while sipping coffee and laying documents across my kitchen table. "They operate on intimidation, which means we need witnesses." That's how we ended up knocking on the door of Grady Thomas, my neighbor to the west. Grady was 73, half deaf, and had a handshake like a vice. He'd lived on his little 2-acre horse plot for 40 years and had watched Saddle Ridge grow like mold on toast. When Mason asked him if he'd ever had trouble with the HOA, Grady snorted. "Trouble? Hell, son, Karen threatened to report me to the Environmental Protection Agency because my manure pile smelled like a public nuisance. Tried to scare me into joining the HOA. Said she'd recommend me for compliance review if I didn't. I asked what he did. Told her if she stepped foot on my land again, I'd introduce her to the business end of my shovel. He agreed to write a sworn affidavit. So did another neighbor, a younger guy named Raul, who owned a small orchard just beyond the HOA line. Karen had apparently offered him preferential listing in the community directory if he voluntarily submitted to aesthetic guidelines. Translation, she wanted him to paint his barn taupe and hide his irrigation tanks. She called it voluntary integration, Raul told us. More like polite extortion. We took their statements, added them to the evidence binder, and started printing duplicates. Mason was already salivating over the idea of discovery. He wanted Karen on the stand, under oath, forced to explain what the hell perimeter harmony even meant. Meanwhile, Karen wasn't taking a break. I started seeing weird Facebook posts from Saddle Ridge's neighborhood group, screenshots forwarded by a sympathetic resident who thought I should see them. Stuff like, "We must protect the value of our homes from adjacent instability. Unregulated properties attract pests, crime, and undesirable elements. Join our effort to bring the Carroll Ranch into community stewardship." Community stewardship, my ass. This was a land grab dressed up in cardigan speak, and from the tone of those posts, I could tell Karen was laying the groundwork for something bigger, something worse. Just to be safe, I upgraded the fencing along the shared boundary. I added more signage, double-checked the locks, and reconfigured the cameras to record in 4K because the next time Karen came sniffing around, I didn't want any pixel left to interpretation. And knowing her, it wasn't a question of if, just when. Walking into the courtroom that morning, I felt like I was stepping onto a stage for a play I didn't audition for, except I wasn't acting, and the stakes were a hell of a lot higher than a bad review. Mason was calm, cool, and focused. I, on the other hand, had drunk so much coffee I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. We had the documents, the footage, the witness statements, the whole arsenal. Still, the idea that I had to legally prove I wasn't part of a suburban HOA was ridiculous enough to keep my jaw tight. Karen showed up like she was attending a charity gala. White blazer, glossy heels, oversized sunglasses, and an entourage of 3 board members from Saddle Ridge. One of them even brought a color-coded binder with labeled tabs like they were about to pitch a startup. The judge, a stout, gray-bearded man named Halford, looked like the type who'd had enough of petty neighbor drama to last 3 lifetimes. We started with opening statements. Karen's lawyer, a guy who looked like he practiced smirking in the mirror, launched into a dramatic speech about community cohesion, neighborhood expectations, and the ongoing disruption caused by non-compliant landowners. He made it sound like I was running a toxic waste dump instead of a ranch with a few animals and a slightly rebellious barn. Then Mason stood up. "No theatrics, just facts. My client owns private agricultural land. Independently zoned and registered for over 40 years, the Saddle Ridge HOA has no jurisdiction here, period. This is not a dispute over grass length. This is an attempted annexation of private land under the guise of neighborhood standards. And we have the proof. Judge Halford nodded. Then let's see it. And we gave it to him. First, Mason laid out the property records, thick yellow documents from the 70s showing the original zoning designations, deeds, and maps. He highlighted the parcel line, separate from Saddle Ridge by over 200 feet and never included in any developer plan. Then came the HOA charter, their own rulebook, which clearly stated that properties could not be incorporated without the express, voluntary consent of the landowner. Mason read that line aloud, then turned and looked directly at Karen. "I believe my client's refusals have been crystal clear," he said. Next came the surveillance footage. Karen climbing the fence, filming the barn, yelling about mandates. The judge watched it on a screen we wheeled in. He didn't even blink. But when the audio from the 911 call started playing, Karen breathlessly claiming I had locked her in and was armed, Halford raised an eyebrow so hard I thought it might launch off his forehead. "You claim he was armed?" he asked, pausing the audio. Karen's lawyer stood. "She felt threatened, Your Honor." "That's not what I asked," the judge cut in. "I asked if the claim that he was armed was factual, because the video suggests otherwise." The lawyer sat back down. Karen was practically vibrating in her seat. Then came the sworn affidavits from Grady and Raoul, full of enough dirt to plant a garden. The judge read through them silently, flipping pages slowly. Mason, meanwhile, stood with his hands clasped, patient as a mountain. Finally, Judge Halford set the folder down and leaned back. "Ms. Strong, would you care to present any legal documentation showing your HOA's jurisdiction over Mr. Carroll's land?" Karen stood. She actually stood and said, "We don't have documentation per se, but we have a vision. We believe in perimeter integration for the good of the community." Halford's eyes narrowed. A vision is not a deed. A belief is not a law. And a perimeter is not a reason to override a man's property rights. Karen sat down slowly. Her entourage suddenly looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. Maybe even my barn. The judge cleared his throat. This court finds serious discrepancies in the plaintiff's claims, including potential misuse of authority, harassment, and intentional misrepresentation. We'll reconvene in 2 weeks to address the legal standing of Saddle Ridge in this matter. In the meantime, all enforcement attempts against Mr. Carroll will cease immediately. Karen's face turned the color of uncooked meat. We left the courthouse to the sound of her lawyer whisper screaming in her ear. Mason turned to me in the parking lot and said, "You feel that?" "What?" "That's the sound of a case falling apart." 2 days after the court hearing, Mason called me at 7 in the morning. Way too early for a man who considers silence and black coffee sacred. "Jason," he said, "the county prosecutor's office just filed criminal charges against Karen Strong." I blinked at the phone like it had grown teeth. "Say that again." "She's being charged. 3 counts. False emergency report, criminal trespass, and attempted fraud through misuse of her HOA position. You should be getting a subpoena soon. Not as a defendant this time, but a key witness." I sat down at the kitchen table and let that sink in while Brewster knocked over his feed bucket outside like a furry wrecking ball. Turns out Judge Halford had forwarded our courtroom evidence package, including the 911 call and the video footage, directly to the district attorney's office. They didn't waste time. Apparently, this wasn't Karen's first rodeo with legal gray areas, but it was the first time someone had presented enough airtight proof to drag her over the felony line. It got better. The DA wasn't just going after Karen. They were opening an investigation into Saddle Ridge HOA itself. There were whispers, then statements about altered meeting minutes, proxy votes cast without authorization, fines levied against non-members, and even forged compliance agreements submitted to the county as part of an attempt to expand HOA boundaries. In short, the whole damn organization was dirty. News traveled fast. I started getting calls from neighbors I barely knew. Some were angry, not at me, but at Karen. Others were relieved. A few of them, clearly terrified of being next, offered to talk. One woman, Julia, who owned a small property just outside the official HOA line, sent Mason screenshots of emails where Karen threatened to involve code enforcement if she didn't paint her house a neutral HOA-approved shade. Mason called it a gold mine. "This is organized abuse of authority," he said, flipping through new affidavits like he was sorting playing cards. She used her title to pressure, manipulate, and financially target people. That's not just civil, that's criminal coercion. Meanwhile, the media caught wind. Some local reporter from Channel 9 showed up at my gate, asking for a statement. I declined, but later that night, there was my face on TV. Walking out of court next to Mason, camera footage of Karen scaling my fence playing on loop like a blooper reel. They ran it with the headline, "Ranch Owner Fights Back. HOA President Faces Criminal Charges in Property War." It was surreal, and while I didn't care much for the spotlight, I was glad the truth was out in the open. For once, people saw beyond the manicured lawns and regulation rose bushes. They saw the kind of rot that grows when power goes unchecked. Karen naturally tried to spin it. She released a public statement through the HOA's website claiming she was the victim of a coordinated smear campaign by anti-community elements and promised to defend her role with integrity. That same week, the board voted to place her on temporary leave pending legal outcomes. Translation, they threw her under the bus the moment it got too hot. But the damage was already done. The district attorney filed a motion to freeze Saddle Ridge HOA's discretionary spending accounts during the investigation. Karen's personal bank accounts were flagged for a potential restitution seizure. The sheriff's office executed a search warrant on the HOA office, and from what Mason heard, they walked out with boxes of documents, hard drives, and what might have been a drawer full of unsigned violation slips. And as for me, well, I kept doing what I always did, waking up with the sun, feeding the animals, working remote contracts from my desk by the barn window. But now there was a folder marked Legal Victory in Progress sitting next to my coffee mug. Every day, it got a little thicker. Every day, Karen's world got a little smaller. Courtrooms always feel cold to me. Not just the air, but the silence, the tension, the way everyone talks just a little too quietly, like the walls themselves are judging. But this time, I didn't feel like the guy fighting uphill. I was just a man waiting for the last stone to fall. Karen sat 2 rows ahead, flanked by a different lawyer this time. Not the smirking one from before, but a tired-looking woman who kept rubbing her temples like she regretted taking the case. Karen looked smaller. No blazer, no high heels, no sunglasses indoors. Just plain clothes and the twitchy posture of someone who'd finally figured out that this wasn't a PTA meeting. The judge, not Halford this time, but a criminal court judge named Alvarez, read the charges aloud with clinical precision. Count 1, false emergency report. A felony under Arizona law, especially when it involved falsely reporting a weapon and triggering a potentially lethal police response. Count 2, criminal trespass with intent to intimidate, supported by video, 911 audio, and the absurdity of her shouting about a mandate while standing in the middle of my damn field. Count 3, fraud and misuse of official capacity, tied to the forged violation notices, coercive letters to neighbors, and misrepresentation of the HOA's jurisdiction. Guilty on all counts. When the judge handed down the sentence, the whole courtroom held its breath. 5 years in a state correctional facility with eligibility for parole after 3 if she could demonstrate rehabilitation and 0 continued interest in HOA governance. A personal fine of $50,000, and a civil order that Saddle Ridge HOA must pay me $85,000 in damages and legal fees, plus an additional $20,000 to cover the legal harassment of my neighbors who came forward. But that wasn't all. The judge also issued a court-supervised oversight order. The HOA would now operate under the watch of a county-appointed auditor for 2 full years, with the power to override board decisions and review every single enforcement action. Karen's mouth was a flat line. No tears, no speech, just a quiet nod and a long stare at the floor as the deputies cuffed her and led her out the side door. No applause in the courtroom, just the quiet shifting of people realizing something big had happened. And someone had finally put a leash on a system that thought it was untouchable. A few weeks later, I got a letter in the mail. Official envelope, DA's seal. Inside was a single sheet, handwritten. Mr. Carroll, Frey, your persistence and composure helped expose not just a person, but a pattern. You've done this county a service most people wouldn't have had the grit to finish. Thank you, J. Alvarez. I framed it, hung it right above my desk. Life went back to normal, more or less. I never wanted a spotlight, just peace. And now, finally, I had it. Brewster got a new shade structure, the barn got repainted, and I finally took a weekend off to camp near the canyon rim. First time in over a year, I didn't check the security cameras twice a day. As for the ranch, I had a new sign made. Hung it on the main gate, right where anyone approaching would see it clear as day. Hafsate's private ranch, not part of any HOA. Trespassers will be filmed, prosecuted, and possibly fed to Brewster. And under it, a small metal badge screwed into the wood. Perimeter Security Chief, Brewster 2000 ASOLBs of No Bull. The neighbors love it. Even Grady chuckled when he saw it. HOA tried to erase this land with bureaucracy and bullying. Now it's on the map in ink and iron. And Karen, well, last I heard, she's not so concerned about perimeter harmony anymore. Now she's got all the structure she could ever want. 4 concrete walls, a schedule, and a jumpsuit with her name on it.